A lot of this is giving you the cliff notes of everything that I've been dealing with for the last 17 years of my journey. So let's talk about open source in the business world. I'm going to break this down to a few things in the overview. So we're going to talk about different license categories, what those mean from a business perspective, not necessarily how the licenses are categorized, but more how businesses tend to categorize those licenses. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to find and track your open source software inside of your organization, and how to then manage that as you're moving forward. Why do you care about this? Well, most of you probably work for a startup, or you work for a big company, which means if you're working at a startup, that means you're going to get acquired by a big company, and all big companies care about open source software. Why do they care about the open source software? Just because it's open doesn't mean you can use it, is really what it boils down to. There are 4 categories of licenses that I kind of put everything into as part of this discussion. You've got your permissive licenses. Everybody loves those, hence the giant lovey face. You have your copyleft licenses, which is where it gets interesting. You have trialware, and then you have generally unsuitable for business use licenses. So what does this mean? Let's start with permissive licenses. This is the stuff that we all know and love. This is the foundation of Unix. The BSD licenses, the MIT licenses, Apache 2.0, the Mozilla public license, the Eclipse public licenses. You can just use these. This isn't a problem. Most companies don't care. Where you start running into trouble is when you start getting into copyleft. Copyleft is a fantastic idea started by the Free Software Foundation. But the big thing to note is that the Free Software Foundation's goals do not align with what businesses want to do. And so you start running into problems. The big 2 here are the GPL and the LGPL. There's also like the Creative Commons share-alike license, but you typically don't see a lot of source code using that. So there's dragons here. Speaking from experience of working for a large company and working for companies that had large companies as suppliers previously, most large companies tolerate GPL v2 and abhor GPL v3. 15 years ago, this wasn't a problem. Everybody was like, no big deal, we'll just take the GPL2 version of the code and we'll kind of go from there. The issue is there's been a lot of security incidents since then, so those very old unmaintained versions of code are bad. If you are someone who used the command line in macOS for the last decade, you know this pain. Because a decade ago you're like, this is a little stale, but it's not too bad. And 4 years ago you were like, oh God, and then Apple finally moved everything to BSD licensed stuff, and it suddenly got better. So this is one of the things that you kind of like need to keep track of. Now, big point to talk about here is there is a difference between GPL software that you're using as part of your operating system or as part of your container image versus GPL software that you are using in your application. So we mentioned I'm a RISC-V ambassador. One of the things that we're doing in RISC-V right now is that we're building simulators for the RISC-V instruction set. And we have this project called the Golden Model that uses this programming language called Sail that compiles out a simulator for RISC-V that's formally verified. It's very cool stuff. We need arbitrary precision. So the developers went, we're going to use libGMP. It's no problem, it's open source. It's not open source with a permissive license. It's licensed, and I quote, LGPL v2 or GPL v3. To which they're like, it's not a problem. And I was like, it is a problem, because one of the tenets of copyleft is you don't get to pick the license. The user does. So if we start shipping GPL3 code statically linked into our BSD licensed code, and some company starts putting this in their application, then they're like, wait a minute, this is all GPL v3 now. And I'm like, yeah. It is, and that's a problem, and that's one of the things that we need to track. How are we going to fix that? I'm still working on it. I'm trying to figure out what features of libGMP we're using. It turns out most of the other arbitrary precision libraries are just wrappers to libGMP, which is frustrating, but we'll see what we can do. Then you have trialware. So trialware is when you find something that has a dual license or the business software license or the server-side public license or anything like this. This is a fantastic business hack that makes your compliance people cry. You can use all of these pieces of software for free inside of your organization, no problem, until a customer touches it. Once a customer touches it, you need a license for it. A lot of this stuff, it's pretty easy to deal with, like Redis, Elasticsearch, CockroachDB, no big deal. Most people don't have a problem with that. Terraform, that gets tricky, because Terraform is also under one of these licenses. It's no longer under Apache 2. Maybe IBM will fix that, maybe not, we'll see. Good?
Oh, it was NPL.
It was NPL, yes, either way, but it's not anymore. The big one is Grafana. Everybody ships Grafana. Grafana is a Pharaoh GPL3. I bet you didn't know that. It has been a Pharaoh GPL3 for like 5 years now. But it's a Pharaoh GPL3 / commercial. So you can use it inside of your organization, but if you're shipping it to a customer, you need to have a commercial license for it, because otherwise anything that it touches must also be a Pharaoh GPL3. Unless you have the commercial license. It's a fantastic way of having a trial. It's a terrible way of dealing with it. And again, the important thing to note here is that if you're using these in a business environment, you're probably going to need a license for it. And very famously, when HashiCorp changed their license, IBM did their evaluation and went, cool, it's going to be cheaper to buy the company. And then you have the generally unsuitable for business use licenses. And this basically just boils down to the AGPL. So you're going to see places where it's like AGPL or something else. And again, important thing to remember, the whole point of copyleft is you don't get to choose the license. The end user does. So if it says BSD or GPL, you don't get to go, well, it's BSD, so we can ship it, because the user can then say, well, this is GPL v3, and so now I want all of your source code. AGPL is even worse, because anything that it interacts with over a network API must also be available under the AGPL license, which is gross. Sometimes you have to do it. So like, people don't want to be on the evil bird site anymore. And so now you have two options. You can go to the butterfly site, or you can go over to Mastodon. But most of the Mastodon instances are AGPL. How do you deal with that? Well, if a person's doing it from the web browser, you're fine. But if you want to have an automated system post to it, that could be a problem. The other part is, like, for something like that, and this was on the first slide, so I'm just going to reiterate this. I am not a lawyer. I am not your compliance person. But for a lot of things where if you're posting public information, most people aren't really going to care. But it is still something that you need to have a conversation with your compliance team, with your law firm team, all of that fun stuff. Is it going to be a painful conversation? I don't know, but like, have it, because having that conversation up front, this is one of the many cases, one of the few cases where having that conversation up front is better than asking for forgiveness later. So how do you find and track these licenses? Because as we've figured out, what you don't know can hurt you. There's a lot of great tools. One of the things that's neat about this is that you're going to look at this and you're going to be like, you know, this sounds an awful lot like security scanning. And I have great news. All of your security scanning tools will help you with this. So you're going to want to know what's in your operating system. This includes the operating system that's in your container image. You're going to want to know what's in your source code, and you're going to want to know what's in your network APIs in terms of how you're communicating with things. You can use I think I missed a slide. Give me 1 second. So I did not. I apologize. So let's say you're in a legacy code base, like, I don't know, the Linux kernel. The Linux kernel doesn't have a dependency manager because it's written in C. So how we have dealt with this is that we have this thing called the SPDX license identifier, which you can see is the very first line of basically every file in the Linux kernel, and also every file in U-boot, and every other large C project that specifies what the license of that file is. If you're using a higher level language, your Pythons, your Nodes, your TypeScripts, all of your incarnations of JavaScript, They have package managers in them that will help with a lot of this. But all of the open source tools that you're already using can give you this information. A lot of times you just need to turn it on. If you can't turn it on because you're already building an SBOM, you can use something like Parlay, which will take your SBOM and then figure out the licenses of everything that's already in it, which is super cool. So the next question becomes, how do you track it? To give you an example of like what this looks like, this is Trivy. I did it against U-Boot. By default, it does not include licenses, so you have to tell it to do that. I tried to run some of the other tools that were on the previous slide, and it turns out that Sift doesn't like C code, but that's fine. Works great on Python and various other things. CDXGen, the biggest problem with that was it ran for 35 minutes, consumed all of the memory on my machine, and then said, I can't figure this out. So if you have a large code base, I would not recommend using CDXGen. But what spits out here is that I don't have all of it showing. I probably should have turned this into an animated GIF, but it's showing you that like, oh hey, the vast majority of stuff is GPL v2. There was some other stuff in there, like there is some open source font license things, because as it turns out, there's fonts in the bootloader. And it was like, I don't know what to make of this, and I was like, it's fine. But like, it gives you classifications and it lets you know what all of them are. You can also get all of this out as JSON, so you can just sit there and go, show me everything that's GPL v2 or GPL v3, and then you can figure it out from there. So now that you have it all, you're gonna wanna track it, especially if you're a small business looking to get acquired. How can you do this? Well, there is this lovely open source tool called Dependency Track, and I know one very large computation, tabulation, and recording company has invested heavily into that project to make it easy for you to use that to figure out whether or not you're compliant. You might know them otherwise as their new name, IBM. There's also some commercial options, including our room sponsor. The question becomes, these commercial products are great. FOSSA especially is wonderful, but I also know, having been through several acquisitions, the first thing that gets shot in the head is FOSSA. Because the business that is acquiring you has an open source strategy system, and you need to integrate with that. Having built stuff on top of open source tools tends to help you, because you can use all of that SBOM stuff and all of the scanners that you already exist, and that can plug into existing systems. And then you can use other stuff on top of that. Where I work, we use Mend. Mend had a rather racist old name, which is still referenced everywhere. But you can, that also will like do all the dependency tracking, will also give you security updates. So it can sit there and be like, oh, this version of the library that you're using is out of date. Here's a PR to fix it. Which is super cool. Like, and my understanding is Aikido does a lot of that as well. So definitely talk to them since they're here. But there's a lot of stuff that you can do with those. The issue becomes when you're getting acquired by a large company, like I said, they have a lot of these things. So having a lot of the pieces in open source tends to be a big help, because you can bring that forward when you go with you, because there's nothing stopping you from doing so. And other than that, you're not alone. If you need help, there's folks who can help you. There's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of resource groups. That's all I have. I'm happy to take questions.